So should we start?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, all right. The idea is to, as I mentioned, share a little bit of what NovaMundi is and our journey to make this video game. Exploring NovaMundi, a language and game development odyssey. So yeah, I think first off, I wanted to share a little bit of what is NovaMundi because, well, some people might not be aware of what it is. NovaMundi is a video game that is made for PC. That means you can play it on desktop computers using Windows or Mac. And this is a game that is mostly about exploration. You are leading a group of indigenous people, Muisca people, in the 16th century, and your goal is to travel this land, travel from town to town, and talk with the authorities on each town and and try to get them into an alliance. It's like a presentation of an alternative history where things were a little bit different in the process of the Spanish invasion of Colombia, what is nowadays known as Colombia. And it's a game that you can already download or get. You can get it on Steam, which is the main application store for video games. And it's a reality. What I want to say is that it's not just a project or something that we are thinking on doing. No, it's something that you can right now go and play, and lots of people around the world has played already. It's currently under a model known as early access. So what it means is that while it's completely enjoyable and you can acquire it, we are still adding some stuff and polishing some stuff. But yeah, that is NovaMundi. And we are going to discuss some of the influences and some of the inspirations that went behind it. As you may notice from this picture, well, some of the most obvious influences is the Age of Empires series, if people knows about that series, and that's what people first notices. However, as we are going to see, it plays a bit different. So yeah, to go back to your first question, Cindy, who am I? Well, I am an indie video game developer. I am the founder of Slash4 Interactive. I have been developing games for a long time, and I really like participating in game jams. Basically, these small competitions that you can join a team of unknown people to create a game together. My focus or my specialty is roguelikes, this kind of games. Basically, these games are games where every time you play, the game provides you with a fresh, new experience, a new layout of the world or new composition of everything. So that's what I have been focusing for a long time, making the computer come up with interesting scenarios for the players that can be played from time many times. One final thing is, yeah, my games often involve trying to adapt local themes or local culture and present it as a game to a global audience. Not just NovaMundi. I had also done some other games. There's a game called Monte del Diablo, which is basically a journey of someone from the mountains of Colombia fighting the devil with a machete, inspired by like more local cultures from around the Andean area. And yeah, in general, there's a lot of inspiration, and you can find all my work at slashy.net.
Thank you so much, Santiago.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to first talk about the inspiration. Why did we decide to create a game with the Muisca culture as a protagonist? And I think it's a very complex question because we did not initially plan to do this. It's the result of a lot of things that have happened through the development of the game. I'm going to also discuss that a little bit in the next slide. But I think basically we wanted to portray the Muisca to the people of both Colombia and all the world as something exciting. Normally, when you think about the Muisca, well, first, if you're a Colombian, you're probably thinking about the school, what the teachers taught you about the Muisca, something that is like in the past, right? Something that is not very cool, just like some people that live there and that maybe not be, you don't relate a lot to that unless you are of Muisca ascendance, if you come from the Muisca. But normally you don't care a lot. I mean, most people in Colombia doesn't care a lot about the Muisca and just sees them as a museum thing, right? As something from the past. That is if you're a Colombian. Now, if you're not from Colombia, you just don't know about the Muisca. You, this is completely unknown to the majority of people around the world. That's something that we have discovered when we were investigating and seeing like the reception of the game worldwide, which is also something to consider because, as I mentioned, I am the founder of an indie video game development studio. Normally, another kind of studio would not make a game of the Muisca because it's too risky, right? It's too risky to create a game of a team that is not very widely known. So that is one of the reasons why we created it, because we could, right? We could create it, and because of the nature of our studio, we are willing to take some risks. But yeah, I think those are like two of the main reasons why we wanted for Colombians to feel excited about the Muisca, to see that there could be a game that is not an fully educational game. We're also going to touch on that on a little bit, but also can be fun, right? Can be something that you can talk with your friends about. Can be something that is challenging, that is actually you feel compelled to play, not just because it's an interesting cultural thing, but because it's cool. So yeah, and also of course for more people from all around the world to learn about the Muisca. And this comes a little bit tied to a bet, I will say, because as I mentioned, there's a risk. Nobody knows about the Muisca worldwide. So there's a risk that nobody will care, but also that it's something different, something novel, and that could be used to differentiate the game, which is something very important nowadays in the games market. There's too many games coming at the same time every day, hundreds of games. So how do you stand out? And we saw that this could be an opportunity for that. But yeah, I think I wanted to discuss a little bit of how it came to be. As I mentioned, we did not plan this out from the beginning, right? It was more of a result of a series of things. And while I commonly, when I get asked about NovaMundi, I always mention the inspiration being playing Age of Empires when I was a kid and playing the Aztecs. That's how they called them, the Aztecs campaign or the Montezuma campaign there, and wondering, well, why not have this but with local culture? However, that's like a seed I would see from the past, something that it was there lingering, but the way that it happened was a bit more complex. And I would say initially, NovaMundi came from like a very long sequence of projects, I would say. And I would like to summarize it because it's pretty long. But basically, initially it was simulator of the 16th century, a sandbox. Basically, you could do a lot of things, and it was mainly portrayed from a European perspective, right? You could be a navigator of the age of exploration, to be Christopher Columbus, or whatever, any of the many navigators and explorers from that era. That's what it was about, and that's a very old project. Then we came and tried to recreate that old project into a more modern representation. That's what you're seeing here, at least a very early version of that. But as you can see, well, sailing around the world had a very important part of the gameplay, right? You were sailing, you were getting sailing ships and manning them with different kinds of sailors and soldiers and stuff. And then it would simulate the journeys around the world, and you could explore the world, create settlements if you wanted, and interact with the people. And I believe that is one of the things that was a little bit of trouble, of problem, how to portray these interactions with the people, because this theme is pretty cool and lots of people relate to it. Being an explorer, going into the unknown, and the horizon of the new world. But when you actually get there, what will you do, right? It's not an empty place. It's not like something that you can just create your town. There's people living there. So how are you going to portray that interaction? And we are in 2023, and it's not the same as it was in 1990, right? When there were games like Colonization or Seven Cities of Gold, and it was pretty simple. I mean, everything was from a European perspective, and there were indigenous people there, but you could just freely exploit them, right? Seven Cities of Gold, for instance, one of the games that was an inspiration for these earliest versions of NovaMundi. The game was about exploiting the natives or the indigenous people. Basically, you sailed there and you fooled them by giving them trash from Europe and getting their gold. That's basically what the game was about. And then you would go back to Spain and get more ships and hire more people and get more immigrants and repeat the process. And while initially it was meant to be like a critic to that colonization aspect, that was kind of lost in the remake that it had, and that was what it was about. So, and then there were some other games that were not as harsh and actually had more deep treatment of the indigenous people, but still they were a secondary thing. Like you had to deal with them, right? Like they were in your way uh, for your goal to plant the flag of your European power on this new world. So yeah, that's some of the things that we found, right? When we were out there looking for funding for the project, because these projects are expensive, we were pitching the game and people started questioning us, like, "Oh, are you serious that what you want to make a colonization simulator? Because that's not going to have a good reception, probably, or at least there's going to be some pushback, and unless you make some efforts to address a lot of critical questions, and we are also going to talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, we found that we started tweaking what we were doing. That's like one of the big first changes that the project had. We walked away from all this idea of simulating the colonization, which was a very important aspect initially, and we say no, it's going to be about exploration. You are still going to be an European explorer, but you are not here to conquer. You are not here to create settlements. You are here to discover this world. And that's actually when the name got changed, because initially it was Expedition, and that is when it came to be NovaMundi, because it was a new world. NovaMundi, Latin words, whatever, or at least inspired by Latin. And that is, we thought that was good, right? In order to avoid having to properly represent the indigenous people that live in America, we created fictional cultures. And you were just exploring this land, which was like an alien land for you, discovering these cultures, and also not just the cultures, also the fauna of the place, the animals, and taking note of them in a journal. And that was okay for us initially, and that's how we released an initial version to the public. And from there, we got a bit of a public backlash, which we did not anticipate, because in Twitter mainly, because people did not really like that we were still selling this from a European viewpoint. And the cultures that we were creating there, again, as I mentioned, I'm really into procedural generation. So basically, we were generating these cultures, getting like aspects from different cultures and mashing them together. And while we did that, we were not portraying them in a respectful way, right? Because we would end up like taking something from a culture from, for example, North America, and mixing it with a culture from Asia or something like that. And it was like a cartoon what ended up there. So that's one of the pitfalls of procedural generation. It's hard to apply it when it's a sensitive context like this. So that gave us another. That led us to steer away from that idea again. And every time we do this kind of movements, it's very expensive because you have already invested a lot on the development, which comes from design, right? You design the game and you build upon that design. So then when you change important underlying aspects of the design, everything is expensive because you waste a lot of development that you already put into the game. But we decided it was worth it. In parallel to this, we also had a project which was on board of this same one, which was called Los Hijos de Bachué, and basically Children of Bachué. That is the project with which we won Crea Digital 2019, which is a government program that gives Colombian companies funds to develop alpha version or a beta version of a game. And that game was the initial approach to the Muisca culture that we did, which was a pretty different to what we ended up doing. We did the research on our own, and when I say research, I mean just going to Wikipedia and doing some random investigations, I would say, but without a lot of depth, right? And we created this initial scenario that was really, really close to Age of Empires 2 because it was like a sequence of scenarios telling a story. And this story was based on a kind of local, I would not say legend, just like a story about the, and I think it's interesting because I believe this is for the Santo Tomás Tunja as well, right?
Yes, Santiago.
And yeah, and that story was about Hunza, right? Was about how Baganchique, which was the son of Baganchique, which was a local chieftain, traveled to Hunza with his fiancée, or the girl that he was going to marry, and the Sake, I believe it was the Sake, got in love with her and took it from him, and he devised a plan like similar to Romeo and Juliet to fake her death, and so they could escape that fate of the Sake. And then the Sake found out, and I am spoiling this story. Maybe that scenario could arise some other time in the future. But yeah, it was very different, and it was an initial approach to what we did with NovaMundi. And I am extending a lot in this, but it's because the story is so long, and I thought it could be interesting for the students and for people to know, because we haven't talked about that a lot, or at least not in deep. So yeah, and then it was like the final change, which is where we are now with NovaMundi and this quest to unite the Muisca, where we try to keep a lot of the gameplay elements that made the initial design fun, but we decided to approach the question of the theme in a more involved way. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, cultural heritage in game, and how to remain cool while doing that. The rationale behind this is why should we include our cultural heritage in games? And I believe the main question or the main reason for this, besides what I already mentioned about the marketing, differentiation, and all that, is that video games allow the players to live the stories. They allow the players to create personal connections to the story, which is a great advantage when compared to other media. So using video games as a tool for that gives us a lot of power. However, there's a lot of challenges associated to that. And of course, as I already mentioned, you want to remain cool. You want the game to remain fun. You want the experience to not be felt as if you were watching a lesson, right? In the end, you are playing games in your leisure time. This is not something that you do at school, right? This is something that you do when you're at home, when you finally got some free time. So why would you like to continue studying, right? You don't want that. So that is one of the biggest challenges. And I believe the way that we have addressed that is all the story in NovaMundi is optional. We let the players decide how much they want to dive into it. And the idea is we try to lure the players into getting involved into the story, into the culture indirectly. We don't force them to get involved into the anything related to the culture. So instead of telling them, I'm gonna teach you about why the gold was important for the Muisca people, we never do that. Instead, for instance, we put a character in a town, and that character is a goldsmith. And if the player wants, he can interact with that character. And if the player wants, he can just ask, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a goldsmith. Okay. And I need your help with this, right? Because the players gotta have an incentive to interact with them, right? So I am a goldsmith, and I need your help. I need you to get me some gold because I need to create a Tunja or something. And the player can stop there. All right, the mini quest gets added to this quest log, and he can just leave that conversation and proceed with that gameplay. Just get the gold and fetch it back to the goldsmith and get some reward, and that's it. However, the player can also dig into that. So when he talks with these goldsmith, he can tell you, yes, I am a goldsmith, and the Sihipqua, the leader of the town, really likes my designs. And the player can decide, the leader of the town, all right, so I want to know more about the leader. And so he clicks on that dialogue option. And then the goldsmith tells a little bit more about how the government works for the Muisca from his perspective, right? It's not like a textbook thing where it's described, but he says, yes, this is a very good chieftain, and he leads the captains into battle, or he creates or he organizes markets every month or something like that. And then that may make the player curious. So the markets, tell me more about these markets. Of course, in the market we offer, we can see different kinds of items, food from different places, like potatoes, and there's also an additional aspect that I forgot to mention there, and it's in this content we are also including fragments of Muisca Kubun, which is basically the language that was spoken, and it's still spoken a little bit, but it's mostly lost and was spoken by the people of what is nowadays Bogota, because there's variants of this language, and also gonna talk about the collaboration aspect and in a little bit. But yeah, we tell the player they organize these markets, and there's potatoes and also some other items from the valleys, and then he clicks in the valleys. Oh, so there are valleys and etc. So the idea is to entice the players to dig as much as they want, but in any moment they can decide to skip all that and just play the game and play the cool aspects of the game. Like, we have as you can see here, we have combat, and combat is a strategic combat. And in the combat, you can just play it as if it was a normal role-playing game or a normal medieval fantasy strategy game, and not care a lot about the culture, the Muisca culture. Just play it with, there are units that can attack at a given range, and there are units that are stronger in melee combat, and etc. And there are bonuses. So if this unit is wearing a specific kind of armor, then they are strong against some kind of attack, and the players are familiar with all this, right? So someone that has played strategy games can feel very familiar when playing NovaMundi and not care about the cultural aspect, at least not initially, but then he sees that, for instance, an armor could have a modifier, basically a blessing, and this armor is blessed by Kukakui. And then he says, blessed by who? And that gives you a bonus in combat. All right, he may not care about that, just a bonus, but then he may want to dig into that. So, okay, so what is a Kukakui? What's that? And feel like we pull him into wanting to know a little bit more about the culture. And while I am at that, yeah, some of the challenges and additional challenges besides making it or remaining cool is that you need to research, right? You need to research to do things well, because I don't think you can just have a good intention of, all right, so I want to talk about the Muisca, and just doing some cursory research is going to be a wasted opportunity to really share more about the topic that you are sharing, right? And in the case of NovaMundi, well, we had a lot of challenges because the history of the Muisca and the Muisca culture is a very hard topic to find the quality information. Which brings me to the collaboration. So how did we overcome that challenge? And for us, it was very important to get in touch with people that really knew what they were doing and that really knew about this culture, the history, and we had to surround ourselves with academics like Jose Manuel, who is in this picture. He's a linguist and historian. Well, he's a linguist from Universidad Nacional, but he's also a historian and all around knows a lot about the Muisca culture. And when I said that, I mean recent research, not just the historical things that you were commonly taught in school about the Muisca, but like he has dug into historical evidence, documents, stuff like that, and he's also done a lot of work into researching the Muisca the Muisca language. When when you are doing a cultural game, I believe it's important to research and find people that is expert on that. For NovaMundi, this was the case, but for some other games, it's just if you want to make a game about, I don't know, a local tradition that your grandmother told you, well, then sit with your grandmother and interview her, fetch all the knowledge that you want and that you need from her. And in particular for us, Jose Manuel was a key player in NovaMundi because he also knew a little bit about video games, or a lot. Well, not as much as we do, but at least he was familiar with the medium, and thus he knew what we needed, right? Because sometimes, especially when you are dealing with cultural organizations, they want to create e-learning, right? They want to create an edutainment thing, a lesson, interactive lesson, not a video game. And their expectations are a little bit different. So yeah, that's something that we did not have an issue with Jose Manuel. So yeah, it's very important to collaborate with different kinds of roles that commonly when you are doing some, normal games, video games, you don't have in your studio, because you have designers, you have programmers, you have QA, but these specialists are normally something that you need to reach out and find for every particular project, and something that you cannot or should not improvise, I believe. All right, so I also wanted to talk a little bit about the receptions that we have had. As I mentioned, NovaMundi is a game that we, from the onset, wanted to market worldwide, right? We were not thinking on creating a game that was meant for Colombian people only. There's some challenges to that. The Colombian market is a hard market when it comes to consumption, especially of indie games like ours. So what has people thought? As I mentioned, nobody knows about the Muisca. Sadly, and I think the exposure that people has had to indigenous cultures in general, well, it used to be just the what is called the Aztecs, or at least the people from what is nowadays Mexico or Central America, if we want to include the Mayas, and then the Inca. Disney has used these sources of inspiration a lot. But then about the Muisca, well, the people knows about El Dorado, about the legend of El Dorado. But because of how it has been marketed, people often just mixes up things, right? El Dorado from Disney was a huge mix of different cultures, and people takes that for truth, right? They think that that is the reality. So yeah, we found out that that's another challenge, and is you don't want to make something that is too alien to players because they may just walk away from that. So you have to bridge some gaps, right? You have to give them something that they are familiar with that is enough for them to clinch into the game and try to go over the different team. And initially, for us, it's still hard to sell the game as something cool because often people, well, when they say something that is based on an indigenous culture, the immediate reception is this is not going to be cool. This is going to be something a little bit boring, probably something that my mother would like me to see playing or my teacher, but not something that I would like to share with my friends, right? Also because there's a big amount of such games, right? So they have created this idea that is hard to get off from people's heads. So the way that we have tried to address that is focusing in the communications, or at least lately, because this has been a journey as well for us, on the gameplay aspects of the game, so that it's more subtle that this is about an indigenous culture. Because depending on the audience, we have had some coverage in the local media here, in magazines, in blogs. We had an article in Semana, Caracol Radio, and that's very cool because for them it's very interesting for there to be a game about the Muisca because there's not many, right? So they are interested on talking about that, and for them we can sell that as an interesting point. But for the vast majority of players, it's gonna play the other way because what I already mentioned. So yeah, lately what we have been doing is trying to be more subtle in that, and in the description of the game in the store, or when we talk about the game, we highlight the gameplay aspects of it, because the players are then able to see the other aspects, right? You don't have to tell that the game is about an indigenous culture of South America in the 16th century, because people will figure that out, right? And you are already expending your only chance for them to get interested into the game, and as I mentioned, that may not be enticing. So instead, we are telling them that this is a game about the exploration, procedural generation. That means that every time you play, it's a completely different environment, a completely different challenge, and that this is a game of strategic combat and or tactical combat, where you need to prepare your group to face ever-growing menace of enemies. And then they see the key art, which is also very important. We are switching from like some art or cover art that really wanted to embrace the idea of the Muisca culture or the nature of Colombia, the Paramos. And we're switching a bit away from that into things that make people feel more excited about, like the combat, the conflict, and sadly that is what sells, right? And since we need more people to get the game, and then we will teach them about the Muisca, but we don't want them to walk away from it because of not being interested. So that's one of the things that we have done. And in the first slide, Actually, it had the latest art that we had created for the game. But yeah, it has had a good reception, and we had some coverage with streamers, and they after they get like over the weird words, because for them Ramiriki, for instance, Ramiriki, they were never able to pronounce that, and that used to be the first town that you visited. And we have made some tweaks responding to that. But they have found the game interesting. They have learned about the culture, and I think we are in this phase of the project where we're planning to do the full release. As I mentioned, we are in something called early access, and we are exiting early access into a full release, and we're gonna do a final push to reach out to more streamers or YouTubers that are specialized on strategy games, historical strategy games mainly, and yeah, we want to be able to exploit the this interesting different team, but also sell the gameplay elements that we have created for the game. Well, and finally, wanted to also talk a little bit about the local industry of video games. I think that could also be interesting. And I believe I think there's two things here at least, two or three different aspects to cover. Colombia and well, South America in general, but Colombia especially has seen a lot of growth in the outsourcing service outsourcing area, especially software development. And in Medellin, there's a lot of companies at least that are offering those services, and basically it's a win-win situation where companies from North America can get some good rates, good quality work, similar time zones when compared to India or Eastern Europe, and similar culture, so they can work together fine. And there's been a lot of growth in that sector, right? Companies that want to further develop their games or the art of their games, so they hire Colombian studios that are specialized in that and can help with that. That's one thing that is growing. That has a lot. That sector has a lot of competition from other kinds of software, right? Because it's not just video games. We are sharing the talent pool with other kinds of software, corporate software, websites, front end and back end development, all that, which leads to challenges such as high salaries, because these companies are able to offer very high salaries, which are very hard to match. So then you have to find out ways to keep people interested in working with you, which is hard because everybody likes money. So that is one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge of having a local talent that has been is not as big as it was some years ago. You can now find people that both via the academy, such as universities, such as you, are learning a lot, and also people that is just super involved into game development or into the disciplines of game development, and have decided to go on their own and learn. So yeah, I believe that part has really not been that much of an issue lately. And finally, well, we also have the companies or the studios that are trying to create their own games, which like us. And for that, the challenges are similar. However, it's a little bit different because depending on the level of production that you want to put in your games, you don't have to get a big team. You can work with a smaller team that is talented and that is really invested into the game, and you don't have to directly compete in the case of indie development and in the case of the project that we have made with all these big external companies that have landed here and that are using the local talent. You can work with people from all around the world. You can do partial commitments. You can have people just freelance their work in their free time, and that works just as good for your game. So yeah, that gives you some advantages over outsourcing, because when you're outsourcing, it becomes a business of getting people and retaining people, and that is very different from making games. So that is why we are in the second, or at least trying to focus on the second aspect of development. So yeah, I think that covers what I wanted to discuss. I believe we are a bit over the time, maybe, not sure, but yeah, I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Is there any question in the audience?
I
Hi.
Do you think this could be a tool that can be applied to learning context for students in careers like archaeology, for example? This is a tool that you can apply to students of careers like archaeology can use to learn more about our culture.
Yeah, I believe this is a game that has an universal audience, right? And the idea is that people can learn about the culture and while they are playing, right? So definitively this is a tool that you can use for that, but you don't have to use for that, right? You can just have some fun playing, and our intent is that people learns without them even noticing that we were teaching them stuff.
Santiago, meanwhile, they are just typing the question. I would like to extend you an invitation. That invitation is that you can come to Tunja and just explore with us some of the touristic routes that we have created. If you want, we're just offering here the place that where you can stand, just let's spend time with us. And I know that the priest from Santo Tomás University would be more than glad to have you here. In our university in downtown, we have the original statue of Mono de la Pila. That is the
Okay.
real one.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am long overdue to visit Tunja and to visit all the territories, because it's been remotely. I mean, for us, we have just been through the eyes of some other people. We have portrayed the land and the culture, and I will be very interested on seeing it myself. So yeah, definitely thank you for the invitation, and hopefully it can be done soon.
As soon as you want it, we are just going to have you here. So we'll be more than glad to have you here. Edwin has just finished written the question. It's going to be, what did make you create a game based on this historical heritage? And what kind of challenges did you go through when thinking on the game?
As I mentioned, it was a long journey. It was not something that we planned initially, but I think in general, I see a lot of potential on creating games based on our historical heritage, because that allows us to like put a lot of our personal history or our personal thing that we have lived through or that we have heard our family or our friends talk about. And so yeah, we have a personal stake in the design of the game. Recently, for instance, with some friends, I started creating a game about Vuelta a Colombia. So basically, this is the game that used to be played in the streets of Colombia, where kids would draw a road representing the stages of the cycling championship, Vuelta a Colombia, and then they would just propel these bottle caps forward to complete the route. And yeah, why did I do it? And I think people from other places will find it interesting. And I am putting a lot of what I heard my father talk about in the past and how they played. And I believe that enriches the experience of the game. That allows you to tell more than just a normal fantasy story, medieval fantasy or something like that that has been told a million of times. You are sharing a little bit of your personal story here. So I believe that that is why it's important to make games based on cultural heritage.
Thank you so much, Santiago. They are just writing because they are in downtown. In this auditorium, we love the graphics you displayed on the screen. Great job. Just in order to close this part, I would love that you can share with us how do we get access to the game, because I believe that it's going to be important.
Sure. As I mentioned, the game is available now. If you have a PC, you can just go to Steam. You can find it on the Steam store, NovaMundi. And if you have the Steam client installed, you just search for NovaMundi in the store, and you will find it there, along with our other games. It's very cheap, 20 to 500 pesos. I believe it's very affordable. This price is actually lower in Colombia because I believe for all the rest of the world it should be about $10 or $15. I forgot, but we wanted to have it be more approachable to the Colombian market, and that's fun because initially the game was released only in English, and everybody was like, "Why? Why don't you make it in Spanish as well?" So we had to rush the translation, and I believe we also want to reach people in Colombia, even if it's not a very profitable market, because it's not, sadly. It's still something that, as a secondary goal, we want, as I mentioned, people to be proud of their heritage and to see or to think that it can be something cool to talk about with their friends.
Dear Santiago, as we conclude this enlightening masterclass, we are inspired by your passion for video game development, cultural preservation, and the exploration of history through immersive experiences. Your expertise has left an indelible mark in our audience, and we are eager to continue this fascinating journey of learning and collaboration. And they are just having another question, just like in order to close. They like to know if you took the inspiration of the video game The Age of Empires. I think that you mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah, there was definitely some inspiration. At least visually, it's similar, of course. There are some parts that also are similar in the gameplay. However, there are also some very important differences on how the games play. Age of Empires is an RTS, a real-time strategy game, and it's also a 4X game. Basically, what that means is in Age of Empires, you are extracting resources and then defending these resources and using them to overcome your opponents. That's what you do in Age. And in NovaMundi, there's no resources, there's no building. You are not building. You are not even creating units, so you don't have to gather resources in that sense. You are just exploring. But yeah, it's been an inspiration. Also, not just in the gameplay and in the visual aspects, but also on how Age of Empires made people feel interested in history, right? Without being an educational package. Even if it was super inaccurate in many parts, because as I mentioned, the research is very important, and at least initially they did not account for a lot of stuff that is known nowadays. But just making history feel like something that it could be cool, and that you could just follow the campaign of Joan d'Arc or Saladin or whatever, and you would feel interest on that without having to go to the library and read some history books with some outdated visuals or something like that. But no, you were just like seeing this medium of cool computer graphics with action and swords and siege weapons and all that, and it made history cool. So yeah, that's something that definitely impregnated NovaMundi as well.
With that, we would like to formally thank you, Santiago, for being our guide in this odyssey through video game development, cultural promotion, and the possibilities that lie at the intersection of these two worlds. Your presence has made a lasting impression, and we look forward to the legacy of knowledge and inspiration that you have imparted to our audience today. Thank you, Santiago, for being part of this masterclass. We immensely grateful for your time, your wisdom, and your passion, and look forward to the continued success on the voie, and hope that stay connected on this fascinating journey you share with us. Thank you so much, Santiago.
Thank you so much for this invitation.